Now it's my pleasure to invite Philippe Froissard. You are welcome to talk about our climate city approach, but also on the Green New Deal. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alain. Thank you very much for your kind words. So I'm not going to present the Green Deal to you because I will leave that pleasure to our new president, Madame von der Leyen, that will do that later on today. What I will present to you this afternoon is a little bit of a state of play as regard the missions, which is a new tool that we have in our program for research innovation in Europe, which is going to be Horizon Europe, which will start in 2021 for 7 years. I will give you a bit of information as regard the progress on a specific mission, which is the Climate Neutral and Smart Cities mission. And then I will, at the end, make some links with the Green Deal and what is expected of research innovation in the Green Deal and what is expected as regard the cities in particular. But first, I need to operate, yes. So before I talk about the missions, maybe I should say a few words about Horizon Europe, but it's something which is probably very familiar to you already. When we analyzed the implementation of Horizon 2020 in the midterm review, we saw that there were room for improvement as regard a number of aspects. One of them, for instance, was innovation. The research innovation program had been good at supporting innovation in the past, but mainly incremental innovation. And there was room and there was scope, as it was analyzed, to increase the support that could provide it not only to incremental innovation, but breakthrough innovation. And hence came the novelty of having a European Innovation Council as part of the new proposal of the Commission for the Research Innovation Program, Framework Program. Another novelty came from the fact and the analysis of the research program, where we showed that the research actions that we supported had impact, but could have increased impact if the impact was really at the core or at the center, at the initiative of the projects and the programs that we were launching. And there came the idea of having mission-orientated programs and initiatives in the next framework program for research innovation, the so-called missions. The structure of the program is known to you. It's a structure based on the three-pillar approach, where you have the pillar 1 with scientific excellence, pillar 2, which is very important, which is the pillar where you have all the global challenges being addressed there, and you have a list of 6 of those global challenges, and pillar 3, where you have the innovation component of the Horizon Europe. Where do the missions sit in this diagram? Well, actually, they sit in pillar 2, where most of the resources used for the implementation of the missions will come from, but they will also draw resources from pillar 1 and pillar 3 if there are some activities on innovation, for instance, or on fundamental science that needs to be done and that can support the implementation of the mission. Let's give you an example. For the cities mission, one of the essential components of the cities mission when it will come to climate neutrality for those cities is the measurement of the CO2 emission. There are research infrastructures that have been put into place in Europe that are measuring precisely CO2 emission in Europe. So it would make sense to use those research infrastructures to support the implementation of the missions for climate neutrality in cities. The budget, well, this is the picture proposed by the Commission, 100 billion for 7 years, where you have the breakdown between the 3 pillars. The bulk of the budget going to pillar 2, 55 billion. 53 billion to be precise. This is the Commission proposal. It goes without saying that if the MFF negotiation does not go the way the Commission proposed, and if, for instance, there is a reduction of the overall contribution to the MFF, it necessarily will have an impact on the research program, which is a pity in particular for those countries that are net beneficiaries of the research innovation program. I know who I'm talking. So if you have, by any chance, the phone number of your finance minister, please remind him or remind her. Remind her that investing in research innovation is a good thing, not only for Europe as a whole, but for those countries which even are the front runners and net contributors of the Union program. Now, a few words on the missions. The idea of the mission is not recent. It's actually an old concept, but which has been revamped in the context of a report that was published in 2018 by Professor Mazzucato, which highlighted the scope of what could be a mission for research innovation in a European context. So the idea of those missions is that they should be bold and inspirational with wide societal relevance. So I think there is clearly an analogy with the missions that were launched in the past, like, for instance, the mission to the moon that the Americans launched in the 60s. They should be ambitious but realistic, but also they should be based on a bottom-up approach. I think this is a little bit of a divergence with respect to what we have known in the past for missions, where there was a technology-driven approach and a top-down approach. They are the missions that we would like to implement in Horizon Europe are more of a bottom-up nature, but they have certainly to be inspirational and they have to be realistic. And so in 2019, in a second report, Professor Mazzucato defined further the implementation of possible missions in Europe under the Horizon Europe program and put the emphasis very much on the fact that citizens have to be engaged at the very start, at the onset of the mission, not only in the design of the mission itself, but also in the implementation of the mission. And she stressed the fact that investment in missions could be used as a leverage to get funding from other sources than research innovation, which is, I think, very important in the case of the cities. Needless to say, more information you can get from the websites. I mean, there is a specific article for the specific program on the mission, which you will find there a description of the tasks and the objective of the mission. In order to implement the missions, you need mission boards and you need mission chairs. The mission areas that were identified in the document that was eventually agreed between the Parliament and the Council last April identified 5 mission areas: cancer, soil, health and food, healthy oceans, adaptation to climate change, and climate neutral and smart cities. For each of these mission areas, there is a mission board and there is a mission chair. And in the case of the climate neutral and smart cities, the chair is Madame Gąkrewicz-Waltz, who is a renowned politician who has been for many years mayor of Warsaw and who is chairing this mission board. Together with her, there is a group of high-level independent experts that composed the mission board. There are up to 15 members in those boards. And what we have to do when composing the boards was to ensure that there would be a good balance between the origin of these experts, the sectors that they are working on, the gender, needless to say, and a balance between the profiles of those participants from the mission board. I mean, to give you an example, for the mission on cities, we received something like 600 proposals, and we had to scale down the selection down to 15 on the basis of this criteria. The mandate of the mission board is, first of all, to identify the mission or missions that will be covering the respective mission area. So in the case of climate neutral and smart cities, it's up to the board to come up with proposals for missions that will be eventually implemented in the Horizon Europe program and in other programs if need be for deployment, for instance. And in a second stage, there is a need for the mission board to reflect on the implementation and to advise the Commission on the modalities of implementation, on the type of activities that would need to be developed specifically, the type of actions that would need to be developed in the Horizon Europe program, but also the synergies that could be identified with other programs, such as, for instance, deployment programs that we have in Europe, but also at national level. So this is the composition of the board for climate neutral smart cities. You will recognize probably some of them, or at least one of the members of the board. So the chair, as I mentioned, Madame Gronkiewicz-Waltz. Alan Larson is our vice chair and has been very active in the early phase of the activities of this mission, also because our chair had to step down for a number of meetings due to an unfortunate accident. So Alan has been de facto the acting chair of the mission and has been instrumental in developing a concept that will eventually be finalized, as he mentioned already, this week. It's not the end of the story, it's the beginning of another story. But I think this meeting on Friday will certainly be very interesting. And then we have also a rapporteur, Annalisa Boni, who is responsible for preparing the report that will consolidate the opinion of the group, of the board, on what is the way forward and what is the proposal for the missions. So state of play of the activities of that mission, I think we gave them a hard job in inviting them to meetings to Brussels every month, if not more. So they will have had 5 meetings. One, actually, the mission board was only set up at the beginning of September. The discussions that we have had in the board were focused mainly on the scoping of the mission and on the identification of the mission, which is admittedly the remit of the board. I should mention that as part of the activity of the mission board, the commission services also have to organize themselves in providing services and support to the mission board in terms of, for instance, studies, reports, analysis that can be given to the members of the board to help them reflect on the scoping of the mission. But also it's an opportunity for us as commission services to coordinate our activities. And I listed here the number of commission services, DGs, Directions Générales, that are involved in the mission, on what we call the mission honor group, following the mission board for climate neutral and smart cities. There are 12 separate DGs involved in this, which shows 2 things. One, that cities are very important and very interesting for everyone. Well, that's very good. But also that the response that we provide at European level is fragmented. And the mission that we would like to launch for cities, therefore, has a very important role in helping coordinating the programs that are being managed by the different services in the Commission. And certainly, this is for the better. I think there is a number of issues that have been flagged already by the board, and one of them, which was also mentioned this morning and was also mentioned by Alan, is the fact that when you want to deal with climate neutrality at the level of cities, you cannot have a sectoral approach. You need to have a global approach or a holistic approach. You cannot just deal with it by just looking at, for instance, the transport issues, the energy issue, the resources issues. You have to look at all those components together. Research innovation has a role to play for sure, and this is the reason why those missions are sitting inside the Horizon Europe program, which is the Research Innovation Framework program. But it's only a component of the response that we can propose for the mission for the cities. If you want to respect the commitment of the Union and the member states on the climate change, and respect those deadlines that you have in 2030 and 2050, those that have been already agreed, you can deploy only solutions that already exist in terms of research innovation. That means the research effort is limited. It's more about deployment. And therefore, you need to ensure that there is a good cooperation and coordination between the different programs and initiatives at all levels to ensure successful implementation of those missions. I should mention the title. It's a working title, and I suspect Alan does not necessarily agree with the working title as a final title, but we should not get into that discussion. I mention it to you, why? As a working title, it is 100 climate neutral cities by 2030 by and for citizens. Why do I mention it to you? Because it has a target. It has several targets, actually. One is the number of cities that we want to address. It's not 9, like you have, for instance, in Sweden. It's 100. And there is a target also in terms of timing, 2030. There again, which imposes an immediate response for most of the cities that want to be involved in this process. And by and for citizens is also very important because it reflects the goal of the mission and the commitment to engage with the citizens in the development of the cities, of the missions and the role that the citizens play for the cities. But as I said, the discussion is still ongoing, and it's very likely that the final title of the mission will evolve in the course of this week. But if there is a consensus in one element in the discussion of the board, and that's not the only element, there are many areas where there is a clear consensus, is on the delivery method of the mission for the cities. And that delivery method was called the Climate City Contract. The Climate City Contract is actually a tool whereby you will commit all layers of decision at local level, at national level, and at European level for the implementation of the missions. Because we want to acknowledge that you cannot have a successful implementation of the mission, and you cannot have cities reaching climate neutrality by a given date without the full commitment of all those partners. The local authorities, certainly, because that will ensure that the design, the involvement of the citizens, the involvement of the national and European authorities, essential also not only for financial reasons, but also for regulatory reasons, and the fact that there are many solutions that can be implemented in cities that require the support of the national authorities for that, or the European authorities when it comes to European regulation. We'll come back to that maybe a little bit later. Where do we stand as regard the finalization of that mission? There will be a meeting on Friday. There has been already initial consultations in a different number of instances and fora, with stakeholders, with citizens, with politicians. And the next stage will clearly be on citizens' engagement. The beginning of next year will be an opportunity for the mission board and the mission board members to engage with citizens to explain and explore with them the scope and implementation of that mission. The timeline, as I mentioned, so we are at the end of 2019. All missions should come up with proposals by the end of the year. Then in the first half of next year, there will be the opportunity for them to engage with citizens, but also help prepare the Commission services in identifying areas which require some support from typically Horizon Europe. Therefore, they will have an impact on the programming of Horizon Europe in terms of activities, goals, and topics. And in 2021, if everything goes according to plan, Horizon Europe will start, and then we'll have the opportunity to launch some of these initiatives to support the missions in the first work program 21-22. Now, maybe a few words on the Green Deal. You heard this morning that the Green Deal is not only about climate neutrality, achieving climate neutrality. It covers actually quite many different areas. I think when it comes to climate neutrality, there is clearly a message that has been sent, or that will be sent by the Commission, that we need to have a comprehensive plan to increase our ambition and our targets for 2030 and 2050. There was references to reduction of 50% towards 55%, and I think this is something that you will find in the Green Deal. That means that we need to step up our ambition, and we need to be more forthcoming when it comes to those targets for CO2 emission in particular. But it's also about energy, when we need to develop a plan, a comprehensive action for clean, affordable, and renewable, reliable energy sources. And that means it's not only an action plan, it's also linked to the fact that a whole series of directives and regulations will need to be reopened and amended to reflect the ambition that the Green Deal will bring to the table. And this is something that will be done in the year 2020 for most of them. When it comes to transport, then the idea is to adopt a strategy for sustainable and smart transport by 2020, another target for 2020, to have clear objectives regarding the use and of alternative fuels, but also having more stringent standards for air pollutants emission. Regarding zero pollution Europe, then clearly there is also a need to have a plan for air pollution actions with measures to mitigate the impact of the greenhouse gas emissions. And together with all those actions, you need to look, and that was very much discussed this morning, the finances. You heard this morning that the EIB pretends to, will eventually become the first, or a climate, how do we call it exactly? A climate change bank, or?
Climate bank.
Climate bank. Climate bank. They have already made some announcement that they are not going to support, for instance, any investment in fossil fuels by 2021. But clearly, the EIB will have a role to play. It is estimated that, for instance, in order to reach our targets, our existing target of 2030, we need an investment of 260 billion euro, which is certainly well beyond what we can do within a research program. That means that investments needs to draw resources from different funds, the EIB being one, but there is also an EU investment sustainable plan of 1 trillion over the next decade that is being discussed as well. So resources will need to be found, and I think the bottom line is not, and it was very clear from the previous communication of the Commission, and that was also mentioned a little bit this morning. Fighting climate change and reaching climate neutrality is an investment. It's not a cost, it's an opportunity also. Because you, in that process, develop business opportunities. And I think it was very clear that moving towards that direction is not to the detriment of your economy. Europe has actually been a good example of showing that you can decouple CO2 emission or greenhouse gas emissions and growth. And this is something that Europe can actually show and teach to the other countries in the world, the developing countries in particular, that you can move towards climate neutrality, not to the detriment of your own economic growth. And it should be perceived certainly as an opportunity, an economic opportunities for Europe to move towards that climate neutrality. And the Green Deal will certainly offer the tools for that in the very near future. When it comes to research innovation in the Green Deal, there are some commitments that are being made in the contribution of Horizon Europe to the Green Deal, which says that 35% of Horizon Europe will fund solutions for implementing the Green Deal. There are clear references to the missions, and the climate neutral and smart cities mission being one of them. Why only 4 and not 5? Because the 5th one is the cancer mission, which does not fit necessarily very well within the objective of the Green Deal initiative. But partnerships are also mentioned explicitly in the Green Deal, and partnerships with the national authorities, but also with the industry in a number of areas will contribute to the implementation of the Green Deal. I mean, for instance, in the area of transport, energy, to name them. And the EIC will also play a role, since they will be able to support breakthrough Green Deal innovation as part of their mandate. I hope that the last sentence of my presentation, which I put in italic, is still going to be in the final version of the communication that will be given to you today, because there was a sentence not long ago which says conventional approaches will not be sufficient. I think this is very important. We need to change the way we operate if we want the Green Deal to be a reality and to work. And that applies to all aspects of our life, and certainly that will apply to the cities. And the mission for the cities is a good example of that, with in particular this proposal of the Climate City Contract, which is a novel tool to implement successfully climate neutrality in cities. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for your attention.